Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. We're happy you're with us. And just saying that we're happy that you have joined the webinar today, Accelerating Electric Mobility in the Caribbean, Policy, Progress, and Market Opportunities. I'm David Barrett, Energy and Mobility Advisor with GIZ, and for today, I'll be your moderator in this webinar. Want to just maybe give another minute or two for other persons to join. So if you would be patient with us, we will be on time. Thank you. So again, just saying welcome to those of you who have joined. Today's webinar is entitled Accelerating Electric Mobility in the Caribbean, Policy, Progress, and Market Opportunities. I'm David Barrett, as I mentioned before, Energy and Mobility Advisor for GIZ, and I'll be your moderator for today. So firstly, I want to thank the organizers of this webinar, Centro de Movilidad Sostenible, CMS, and the German International Development Corporation, GIZ, for, of course, planning and now delivering this workshop. I also want to thank you, the regional stakeholders, for committing the next hour to hour and a half to participate in this update on the status of electric mobility penetration in the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean, electric mobility is developing at different paces in different islands, but all of us are transitioning towards a greater level of sustainability in the transport sector. And today's webinar will highlight some of the factors which are involved. So having said that, Ignacio Rivas, the program director for CMS, will bring our opening remarks, and he will now set the stage for our engagement today, and then I will come back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David, for the introduction, and good morning to everyone. At Centro de Movilidad Sostenible, CMS, we collaborate with UNEP to host the Regional Support and Investment Platform to provide technical support to countries across Latin America and the Caribbean to advance their transport electrification projects. The platform is a core component of UNEP's Global Electromobility Program, and the Global Environmental Facility funds both of these initiatives. Since last year, we have been working actively in the Caribbean together with GIZ, particularly through the NDC-TEC project, which supports CARICOM member states in raising the ambition of their NDCs. The project is funded by the German government through the International Climate Initiative. That collaboration took shape in two moments last year. The first was the Electric Mobility Forum in Antigua and Barbuda in February 2025, and the second was our annual regional meeting in November here in Santiago de Chile. At CMS, we want to keep strengthening these spaces for collaboration because it is the fastest way to turn targets into zero-emission vehicles on the road. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the presentations today.
Thank you, Ignacio. Very, very clear in terms of the collaborations happening within the region. So for today's webinar, our presenters will include Aisha Trimmingham, Operations Analyst at the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. We know it as CCREEE. And she will update us on the targets and the status of e-mobility in the region. Then we will have Niebert Blair, Energy and Transport Coordinator at GIZ, who will highlight some of the successful initiatives and policy interventions which have supported electric mobility. And Antonio Seeley, Electric Mobility Advisor with GIZ, and Diana Ardila, the Sustainable Mobility and Gender Consultant from UNEP. They'll both share the platform and present on the outcomes of some regional EV pilots and expose the Caribbean EV market potential. So each of these presentations will have 50 minutes in total. At the end of all presentations, there'll be a 15 to 20 minute question and answer session. We will manage it so that we're within our time. We do ask that you keep your microphones off during those presentations. And for your information, the webinar is being recorded and we'll make it available thereafter. So for the question and answer session, you may place your questions actually in the chat during the presentations. We'll be monitoring those, but we won't raise them. And these will be answered at the end of the presentations. For the question and answer session, we would actually begin with open mic, so you'll have the opportunity to voice your question on your own. And of course, then for the questions which are placed in the chat, we ask you first to raise your virtual hand, indicate that you have a question by that raised hand, and we will identify you and allow you to speak. So we will then ensure that those questions in the chat are answered. Depending on the time, we may do it together or we may answer those questions one at a time. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker to present. She's Aisha Trimmingham, and she'll present on the EV adoptions in the Caribbean, tracking the momentum. Thank you.
Just let me know when everyone is seeing the screen.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
beautiful. So good morning, everyone. As introduced before, my name is Aisha Trimmingham, and I am an operations analyst at the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, or as we call it, CCREEE, with the responsibility for data and development. This presentation would usually be delivered by my colleague, Mr. Giovanni Buckle, who is a project manager at CCREEE, but I am pleased to be presenting on his behalf today. We will be looking at national targets for the electrification of Caribbean transport, but I also want to connect those targets to what we are actually seeing on the ground, and importantly, to the data we need in order to measure whether we are making the progress. So I'll move through 4 areas. First, I will briefly set the regional context for transport electrification. Then we will look at the national electrification targets and commitments across the Caribbean, which is really the core of the presentation. From there, we will look at the progress that we can currently observe through available EV data. And finally, some barriers and enabling conditions that will determine whether these targets can actually be achieved. A recurring theme throughout the presentation will be data, because setting a target is one thing, but being able to measure progress towards it is another. So before looking at individual country targets, it is useful to recognize that transport electrification in the Caribbean is not happening in isolation. The regional direction has been developing for more than a decade, beginning with the CARICOM energy policy and continuing through initiatives such as CCREEE, the Electric Vehicle Work Group, and Regional Electric Vehicle Strategy. These initiatives have helped establish a common direction around cleaner transport, electric and hybrid vehicles, policy development, and regional knowledge sharing. That regional approach is particularly important for small island markets. Many of our countries face similar challenges with vehicle supply, charging infrastructure, technical capacity, and standards. So there is considerable value in coordination rather than every country developing its system independently. So with that regional foundation in mind, I now want to move from the regional ambitions to the commitments being made at the national level. This is where we start to see quite clearly that Caribbean countries are moving in the same general direction, but not necessarily at the same pace or with the same type of target. So this table brings together the national transport electrification targets and commitments identified across the countries and territories reviewed. I will not go through every row because there's a lot of information here. What is more important is to notice that these targets are not all measuring the same thing. Some countries have very specific EV targets. Antigua and Barbuda, for example, is targeting 100% of new vehicle sales as electric vehicles by 2030, alongside a 100% electric government fleet. The Bahamas has set a 2035 target of 50% of new vehicle sales being electric and another 30% hybrid. Jamaica targets 12% of privately owned vehicles and 16% of public transport vehicles being electric by 2030. And we also have St. Lucia, who is targeting at least 30% of the government fleet, while St. Kitts and Nevis has 2% fleet electrification targets. Other countries frame transport within broader energy or emission commitments. That will be like Barbados, Grenada, Belize, Trinidad, and Tobago. Those are some good examples of those countries. So we also have another group where we found enabling policies, incentives, or general commitments, but then there's no quantified EV target. So the first important point is that these are not directly comparable targets. A sales target, a government fleet target, and an emissions reduction target measure very different things. That difference becomes important when we try to assess regional progress. So this slide is a simplified version of the previous table, and for me, this is really the main takeaway. And I have grouped the countries into three broad categories. On the left, we have the countries that have the quantified EV or fleet targets. In the middle, these are countries with broader commitments, and these countries are clearly moving towards transportation decarbonization, but the target may be expressed through renewable energy emissions targets or general EV expansions rather than a specific share of vehicles. And then here on the right, there are countries where policy environment may be developing through incentives, tax measures, or charging infrastructure, but there is no numeric EV target that allows us to say, for example, that a particular percentage of fleet should be electrified by a specific year. And that distinction matters. A country can be taking meaningful action without having a quantified target, but a quantified target makes accountability and progress tracking much easier. Another thing that stands out is the concentration around 2030, and that has become the dominant policy horizon across the region. And from where we are today, that's not very far away. So we also see government fleets being used as an entry point. That makes sense because governments have direct control over procurement and can centralize charging, have predictable travel patterns, and can use public fleets to demonstrate that technology works before expecting wider market transformation. All right. So when we bring the table and the summary together, a few regional patterns emerge. First, quantified transport electrification targets are still the expectation rather than the norm. There's regional ambition, but the level of specificity varies considerably. Second, we have Antigua and Barbuda that stands out for the scale and speed of its commitment with 100% new EV targets, new EV sale targets by 2030. And then there's also Bahamas that also has a significant sales target, particularly because it combines both electric and hybrid vehicles. So third, the public sector fleets are becoming an important starting point. And we see this very clearly in St. Lucia and Antigua and Barbuda. And it is a particular pathway for governments to lead by example. So finally, several countries are relying more heavily on incentives and enabling measures than binding percentage targets. None of those approaches is automatically right or wrong. The issue is that without clearly defined indicators and reliable data, it becomes difficult to determine whether a country is actually on track. And that leads directly into the next part of the presentation, which is data. So this is where I can speak quite personally from my role at CCREEE, because data collection and development form a major part of my responsibilities. This 2021 dataset is the last comprehensive regional dataset that we have been able to use through the energy report card process for this particular comparison. And I can say from hands-on experience that transportation data is one of the most difficult areas to collect, and EV is even more challenging. So I would encourage you to view this chart as a regional baseline rather than as a picture of where the Caribbean is today. A lot has happened since 2021, but our reporting systems have not always evolved at the same rate as technology, I should say. So this table helps explain some of the problem. Where you see a blank, a zero, or an asterisk, it indicates that the data was not collected, and we have to be very careful about interpreting that as no EV activity. In many countries, the ministry responsible for our transport does not actually maintain the vehicle registry. Licensing the departments may record make, model, body type, but the database may not consistently categorize a vehicle as battery, electric, plug-in hybrid, or hybrid. Customs can tell us what has entered the country, but imports are not the same as the number of vehicles currently operating on the road. Customs data also does not automatically account for vehicles that have been retired or are no longer operational. And then on the other hand, we have private dealers who may have very useful sales data, but some consider that information commercially sensitive and are reluctant to share it. Other agencies may have pieces of that picture, but there's no common identifier or routine data sharing mechanism. So although the table shows that EVs are entering a number of Caribbean markets from as early as 2012 and to 2017, the actual numbers may or should be interpreted consciously. So the biggest message here is not simply the vehicle count, it is the size of the information gap. Now, this is a more recent confirmation that illustrates both progress and at the same time data challenges. So where reporting is available, we see significant growth. For example, Trinidad and Tobago reports more than 10,000 electric and hybrid vehicles, and Guyana approximately have 3,700, with St. Lucia more than 2,000. So across the data actually reported here, the total, it can be seen as 17,805 electric and hybrid vehicles, but it is to be noted that this is what was reported. But that number should be treated as a minimum, not as the total number of EVs across the CARICOM, because several countries are blank. And I draw an example for Barbados. Here, they are blank, but that does not necessarily mean zero. We know that there has been significant public sector electrification activity in Barbados, yet the progress is not reflected in this particular non-vehicle stock table. So the data gap can actually make a country that is doing quite a lot appear as though very little is happening. For us, properly measuring penetration, we need standardized vehicle classifications at registration, routine reporting, better data sharing between transport licensing and customs agencies, and a clear distinction between import, annual sales, and actual active vehicle stock. Okay, so given the time, let us just go through this. Let's look at some challenges. So beyond the data issue, there are several practical barriers to EV adoption across the region. At the policy level, some countries still lack comprehensive EV frameworks for consistent incentives. Technically, we have questions around grid readiness, charging availability, and skills required to maintain and service electric vehicles. Economically, the upfront cost of vehicles and charging infrastructure remains significant, particularly where import duties, taxes are still high. And in small island markets, many of these challenges can be amplified because the market itself is relatively small, which is another reason why regional coordination is valuable. All right. But there are opportunities to accelerate the transition. The good news is that barriers are also point us towards these solutions. So clear EV policies and well-designed incentives can help reduce uncertainty and stimulate early adoption. Financing and partnerships are critical. Pilot and demonstration projects allow countries to test the technology in their own operating conditions, build local technical skills, and generate evidence before scaling. And finally, we also have interoperability and standards, which are important. So we do not want each country or even each charging provider within the country to develop systems that cannot work together. All right. So for electric vehicles, interoperability involves more than just the plug. It includes charging connectors and compatibility, payment systems, access to charging infrastructure, regulatory frameworks, and data and communication. So let us just, I don't necessarily need to stress on this because I know later down in the presentation, we will be looking at the pilot and demonstration projects that are done in partnership with CCREEE and GIZ. So that would be helpful for you guys to see how we are trying to go towards those targets, right? So in conclusion, just 18 seconds to spare, I want to conclude by saying that the Caribbean is clearly moving towards transport electrification, but national ambition, implementation, and data availability are advancing at different speeds. The opportunity now is to strengthen the link between targets, measurable indicators, enabling policy, and real-world implementation. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be taking questions at the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha. You've really carried us across a nice horizon, and you have set up the pitch. I know the next one coming is a cricket fan. Set up the pitch for looking at the incentive mechanisms for increasing our EV fleet. So I introduce you to Niebert Blair. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Ms. Trimmingham. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and good morning. So I will now attempt to share my screen. Just please confirm when you're seeing it.
Yes.
Super, thank you. So today I will be presenting a nice follow-on from Ms. Trimmingham on incentive mechanisms for increasing national EV fleet. So good. So what I'll be looking at today would be the national policies in what we call our flagship countries, our EV incentives in those flagship countries, and vehicle importation statistics as it pertains to what those incentives may have been able to allow. So a little bit about the NDC-TEC and incentive mechanism. So NDC-TEC is a program or project that is supporting the implementation of NDCs in the Caribbean, transforming the transport and energy sectors. So on the output tree, we were engaged in looking into our flagship countries, and our flagship countries are basically 3 of our Caribbean member states and CARICOM countries, basically Grenada, Jamaica, and St. Lucia. We also look at 2 other countries, but they are not our flagship countries, and hence, while we would have done some of the overarching work in those countries, we didn't specifically look into their incentive mechanisms directly, and you'll see what I'll be talking about as I proceed further. So those other 2 countries are Antigua and Barbuda and Belize. So as we proceeded with that study, I'll just share a little bit on the EVs and e-mobility in the flagship countries. Ms. Trimmingham did allude to the fact of the policies. I just generally summarize them, where we look at Grenada, and indeed it looks at an emissions reduction strategy. Jamaica is more targeted than St. Lucia, where we're looking at 12% of the fleet, the national fleet by 2030, and 16% of the public fleet as well. Also, we have some emissions included. And in terms of St. Lucia, the adoption of 30% of the electric vehicle sales and 40% in 2030 and 40% in 2035. So let me dive straight into what those incentive mechanisms are. So in terms of Grenada, what we found is that we saw that electric vehicles, in terms of import duty, excise tax, customs, services charge, they were 0%. All right. And in terms of hybrid vehicles, it was about 25%. So when it comes to value added tax, we saw that there was a 15% on both areas in both electric and hybrid vehicles. And that has been compared here in this table with the hybrid vehicles. So you see what those savings are, because we were working directly to understand what these savings are. So in terms of Jamaica and St. Lucia, this slide presents what, again, those electric vehicles aggregated import duty and service charges are. As of electric vehicles, we see 20% import duty reduced to 10% in the case of Jamaica. And for hybrid vehicles, we see 20% on import duties and a GCT of 20% each. In the case of St. Lucia, there's no duty, 0%, and the value-added tax of 12.5% on both hybrid and electric vehicles. So these are the main incentives in these countries that were driving the uptake. Nevertheless, when we summarize on the EV incentives, we not only look into the vehicles, we look into the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, the electric batteries, all those other devices and things that you need for the electric vehicle space or e-mobility space to operate efficiently. And so we would have compared those across the globe with other regional or global standards for incentive mechanisms. And this slide gives you an idea as to how we compare with other areas of incentives for EV uptake. So overall, we've seen where Grenada, there seems to be a very high incentive mechanism strength. St. Lucia, moderate to transitional, and Jamaica seems high, but particularly through the treatment of taxes, because they have to monitor that. So most of what we did looking into these strategies, we went deeper with these 3 flagship countries. So in the case of Grenada, we did understand what it means in terms of the EVs, pay consumer service charges and the prevailing rate. Also, we looked at VAT and environmental levy. These were being waived, and how can that affect the current fiscal incentives on EVs. We also looked at an emission-based incentive malus on both ICE, EV, and partially EV registration vehicles as well. And in terms of introduction of aged vehicles, importation of aged vehicles. Vehicles, when I say aged vehicles, I mean vehicles less than 8 years old and less than 5 years old, and how that will impact that entire system in the transport sector. So that was a 3-part package that we would have developed, where we combine both fiscal incentives for consumers, EV continuation in terms of current import stage being a 0 tax stage, what the fiscal disincentive would be for ICE vehicles, as well as how do we discourage persons from purchasing ICE vehicles, and what will be some of those limitations in terms of regulations and how to achieve this, especially when we're considering the age vehicles. In the case of Jamaica, Jamaica was a lot more specific. We look at bringing down the reduction in duties from 30% to 10%, and what will that do in terms of the fiscal and environmental costs to Jamaica. Pretty much we looked at the import duties to see what would be those savings that would have been returned when that duty has been reduced, how it would impact, again, the environmental and fiscal environment. A major problem is the foreign exchange capabilities as well, and what happens, the disadvantages of foreign exchange. So the two primary scenarios there were really the import duty of 30% being reduced to 10%, and to know what are the target enforcement pathways for achievement of Jamaica's EV 2030 policy targets. Then finally, with St. Lucia, the analysis in St. Lucia is where we did an overall analysis in terms of ground transportation and looking a lot into vehicle imports, fuel consumption, the perspectives of the population or customers, commuters on electric vehicle incentives, and also to identify what would be some strategies. So this was more of an overarching view, and we would have identified that some key areas for continued support in terms of EV and e-mobility in St. Lucia, which would have been the 6 areas, which would be to maintain and strategically refine the core EV and hybrid fiscal incentives. That is, you make sure that you incentivize more of EVs than you do for hybrids. Then you also have prioritized electrification of the high mileage fleets. Again, this is something that you'll be learning more in our next presentation. Also, we looked at where we're accelerating the modernization of public transport. That comes to a little bit of, we can draw a little bit of what we have seen in Grenada, which is reducing the age of importation of vehicles, implemented a coordinated national EV charging infrastructure rollout within the country so as to accommodate the adoption and uptake of EV vehicles. Of course, we looked at emissions and, like I said, the age restrictions a little more in detail in terms of electric vehicles in the public sector. So in summary of the incentive mechanisms in the flagship countries, I would have identified 3 areas. Zero tax EV model, we would have seen that in the case of Grenada, St. Lucia, temporary concession model to see how things work and how it affects the reduction in tax revenues. And of course, Jamaica, which is a more targeted tariff model so that they can better control the collection of taxes. So I'm sharing a little bit here in terms of how these incentives would have impacted going forward for Grenada. I'm just sharing this little graph, which gives you what happened between 2020 to 2024. As you can see, there's an increase in uptake of EV and hybrid vehicle importation, which can be attributed to the fact that there was a reduction in those import duties concession. And in terms of Jamaica, we see the same has been reflected. So those reduction in import duties would have impacted vehicle importation in some way or the other, no matter how small. How it is expected to grow, we know not yet, because we have to have some more data. And here is the similar understanding with St. Lucia, where we're seeing where hybrid seems to be taking a lot more, more vehicles, more hybrid vehicles have been imported than EV vehicles throughout these 3 countries. And maybe it's because of the dual purpose of these vehicles that persons are a lot more comfortable in utilizing these vehicles. So yes, I've just shared with you those 3 flagship countries where we've been working under the NDC-TEC, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niebert. So Aisha, open up the wickets by sharing with us that clearly we have to set targets and shoot towards them, but then of course a little incentive, encouragement, or maybe a disincentive for non-electric vehicles helps in moving a target. And so we come to the closing batting pair of Antonio and Diana, and they're going to just share with us the outcomes of some of the regional EV pilots. Thanks very much. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for the introduction, David, and thanks to my colleagues Aisha and Niebert for setting the stage. So my responsibility here today is to basically add to what my colleagues would have already presented, and basically focus in on some experiences from some of the regional pilot projects, focusing on the NDC-TEC projects, of course, but I think it would be very important to go backwards first before we talk about the current projects, because I think a lot of experience was gained in the past. So just a quick agenda, we're going to do an overview of some of the major electric vehicle projects executed in the Caribbean. And then we're going to talk through some of the high-level lessons learned from all of these projects. And in the latter segment, we would have the Q&A. So going back first, this is important. This is actually one of the first projects back in 2016, 2017. So this was the electric bus project in Trinidad. So this one I think is very important because this one would have set the stage very early back in the day, especially pertaining to the buses side of things. This was a good example of a project. So this would have received an award from the Chamber of Commerce, Energy Chamber of Commerce in Trinidad. So this one I think is important because it would have been one of the foundational projects where a lot of lessons would have been learned on particularly e-bus. Going forward, Barbados, this is another great case study. I know Aisha would have mentioned the passenger vehicles and stuff, but I think Barbados is a prime example of buses, where you see a significant transition between 2020 and now, where the fleet has been increased significantly between the first phase and now. This is another good example of partnership and collaboration between development agencies and government of Barbados. You see that multiple agencies would have been donors or contributed to the transition there in Barbados. And this one would have been pretty significant because it would have been the first public transport bus project in the region. So I provided some links. You can have a look at those when you receive the presentation. Keeping it going, Bermuda, talking about the Caribbean region. I know I would always want to keep Bermuda included as well. This is another good example of public transportation where you see the transition between 2022 and 2024, where additional buses were added to the fleet. So this is a good sign because what it's showing is that the pilot project phase was basically successful, that it would have convinced the decision makers to add more buses to the fleet. So this is showing the progression of the projects, going from the initial pilots going forward to new projects. Antigua, another example here. You see again, this is numerous agencies contributing in different ways. So you have the initial project with the coaches for school bus operations in Antigua that would have been supported by the Italian government. Then you see UNEP project. So I think we might get some updates later on in the presentation on UNEP. But the good takeaway here again is showing the transition, showing the progress as it relates to electric vehicle projects. And then Jamaica, again, you see another project there, started with a 5-bus project in 2023, and that additional bus in 2024. Again, this is another good example that the technology can work in different circumstances in the region. And Belize, another good example here. This EU project and UNDP project. You see 2 different types of bus technology being utilized. So you're seeing the low floor buses being used for city bus operation. And then you also see the coaches being used for intercity operation. Another very good example of an electric vehicle project in the Caribbean. Lots of lessons that can be learned there. So they got some links there that you could check out these projects. Okay, zooming into the NDC-TEC projects now. So what we would have developed here in St. Lucia would have been a project focused on government services and government transportation. Again, as would have been mentioned in one of the earlier presentations, government setting the example and leading the way is an important piece of the puzzle. So if you look at our slogan for this pilot project, leading the charge, St. Lucia's Green Fleet, you would get appreciation that part of the goals for this work is that the government is seen as a champion or pioneer of the electric vehicle technology. So we have around 22 vehicles currently in operation across numerous government agencies. As Niebert would have mentioned, we would have intentionally targeted some of what we would consider the difficult use cases. So the police, you see, we didn't shy away from those applications where persons might question if an electric vehicle is suitable. We attack those ones directly. So we got water services where the road conditions for where some of these vehicles have to go is not ideal. This is not paved roads. So we got pickups going off-road here in St. Lucia. And if anyone familiar with the terrain in St. Lucia, you would know that we have mountainous terrain, some roads that are not designed exactly with the ideal gradients under consideration. So we are not running away. We're in 2026 now. We're not in 2016 with electric vehicles. So we are not shying away from those more difficult applications. One of the key insights from this project, we have telematics devices installed on all the vehicles. So we're seeing exactly how the vehicles are performing day to day. We're able to see how much kilometers each trip, that sort of information. We're working on getting some additional information in conjunction with the telematics provider and the vehicle OEMs to get more details of the EV performance, but we're manually collecting some of that data that we might not get from the telematics devices at this time. But this is a good project. Again, the key takeaway here, multiple services, difficult use cases, easy use cases, everything. We're pushing the vehicles to the limit here to be able to inform what a realistic wider rollout of electric vehicles could look like. This one, another exciting one. Again, we're in 2026 now. This is not 2016 electrification. So we're going over to marine transportation now. So this is definitely one of the more R&D type projects that I would have worked on over the years. This one, we're targeting marine transportation, which has its own challenges, of course, but we're attacking this one directly as well. We're not shying away from difficult things. One of the things that we had to do here for sure was definitely set constraints on the pilot. So for example, we're doing particular fishing operations that, within 24 hours, these guys are back to shore. We're not going for any long-term fishing applications at this time. That's because, it's new technology. Obviously, safety at sea is an important consideration. So we have set some parameters on what we will attempt to do here. We're also doing Coast Guard application. That's pretty interesting to see that we will be looking at electrifying patrol boats for the Coast Guard. So right now we're at the procurement phase. Actually, I am waiting to see the offers that we get tomorrow from our HQ, who's responsible for the procurement. So this is very exciting. We had a lot of consultations with stakeholders, as you could imagine, because this is definitely something that is new and innovative. So the key things that I wanted to take away, just summarizing the pilot projects, is that you're seeing the progression of what pilot projects in 2016, 2014 would have looked like with electric vehicles and what they look like in 2026. And before we go to the next presenter, so just wanted to summarize some of the key lessons learned. After sales support is critical. Just without targeting any specific projects and singling them out, we've observed that the projects that have local partners have a higher rate of success. We've seen some projects where, they were not necessarily on the ground partners supporting the vehicles, and we've seen some challenges there. So that's an important lesson. It might seem trivial, there are a lot of electric vehicles on the market, and it may seem, just go get anything from anywhere. But I think local partners where someone is there accountable. Again, electric vehicles, they're proven to be more reliable and have greater reliability in that regard, but things still go around. And if you don't have someone there to sort it out, it could paint a negative picture of the technology when it's really not a technology thing, it's a support thing. Charging infrastructure planning and implementation. This is very, very important. Please do not underestimate the work that goes into planning charging infrastructure. Across the projects that we've seen, from the buses to cars, as important as getting the actual vehicles, planning and getting the chargers implemented is just as important. So this is work that you need to do way before you purchase the vehicles and try to get it going, especially for the large fleets where you have to get the support of the utilities, bring the utilities in early as soon as possible so that you can start those processes, right? Of course, these are things that take time, and yeah, planning is important. And on the same vein of utility electric tariffs, we've seen a couple of projects where persons might have not fully analyzed the rates that they would have been using for charging and might have had higher expectations for their savings without considering some of the charges for getting electricity. So pay close attention to your tariffs, look at the demand charges and these types of things so that you can have realistic expectations for your cost savings when you're looking at the EV projects. And EV technology is advanced now. I'm happy to be speaking about electric vehicles in 2026 because it's very exciting to see the options and availability on the market. And in some of these projects, we're seeing fewer technical challenges at the beginning. So you're seeing that these vehicles, particularly the NDC-TEC project, I have very few issues with the first months of these vehicles being on the road, which is very, very good. And I think that's a testament to the progress of the technology internationally. And then again, include extensive training and sensitization as part of the project. As much as I speak on the advancement in technology and is very simple, it's still new to some persons, and an important part of projects are people. And if people don't feel confident in the technology, you could have challenges that are more associated with persons and not the technology itself. So again, the training and sensitization may seem overkill or unnecessary, but it's still very important because you got to bring people along the way to get success. And that's it for me. I'm happy to pass on to David before we go to the next presenter. Thank you. Antonio, thanks very much. Those are really great lessons learned, and looking forward to hear from Diana on the UNEP project. Thanks. Great. We're seeing your slides now, Diana. One thing that Ignacio started off with as he laid the foundation was that there are partners in the region which are collaborating, and the collaborative efforts have brought us certainly thus far. And as Antonio has pointed out, a number of these projects have tested and proven within the different countries the effectiveness and functionality of EVs. So the UNEP, through the GEF7 project, is one of the other major partners with CMS and GIZ in the region. So Diana, we look forward to hearing from you.
Now you hear me?
Yes, we can hear now.
Okay, perfect. And you can see my screen?
We can see your screen. It's good.
Perfect. Thank you, David. So thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for thank you very much for the opportunity to present in this opportunity from the side of UN Environment Program and the Sustainable Mobility Unit. So today I would like to give you a brief overview of the electric mobility portfolio in the Caribbean, focusing particularly on 3 island projects supported through the Global Electric Mobility Program. So it's Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia and Grenada. So I will first briefly position these projects within the broader UNEP Global Electric Mobility Program, and then highlight what was being achieved so far, some of the implementation challenges, and finally how UNEP can continue supporting the Caribbean going forward. So just to briefly set the scene, the UNEP Global Electric Mobility Program is funded by the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, so through GEF 7 and GEF 8. So it is one of the leading global programs supporting low and middle income countries in their transition towards electric mobility with $75 million in GEF 7 grants. So the program operates at the 3 levels. So the global level, we have 4 thematic working groups and an online e-mobility toolbox, which provide knowledge, methodologies, and tools to countries. On the regional level, there are 4 support and investment platforms, including this Latin America and Caribbean regional support and investment platform. So on the national level, the program includes more than 50 country projects. And the program is not focused on one particular type of vehicle. It covers different modes from 2- and 3-wheelers to light-duty vehicles, as well as heavy-duty vehicles such as buses and trucks. And the overall approach is really about combining policy and institutional work with practical demonstration and pilot projects. So countries are not only developing strategies and regulations, but also generating evidence through actual deployment of electric vehicles. So at country level, the projects are designed to address the different barriers that countries face when transition to electric mobility. So this includes stakeholder consultation and institutional coordination, developing national electric mobility strategies and roadmaps, carry out feasibility and impact assessments, and developing policies and regulations. But there are also a strong practical component, as I said, so demonstrating electric vehicles, testing charging infrastructure, developing business model and financial mechanism, and ultimately creating the conditions to scale up investment, for example. So this combination is particularly important, for example, in these small island developing states, because many of the barriers are very specific to island context. So included in small markets, for example, limited technical capacity, electricity infrastructure, constraints, and challenges around vehicle and battery and life management. So the goal is not just to put a few EVs on the road. It's so change the system so that electrification becomes viable, affordable, and sustainable long after the project closes. So to go through the different pilot projects. So the first one is, I want to say, is Antigua and Barbuda. So the project is called Sustainable Low Emission Island Mobility. So it's the most advanced of the 3 in terms of actual electric mobility deployment. So it has a GEF budget of approximately $3.2 million and has been extended to April 2028. So the project focuses mainly on public transport, including buses, minivans, and taxis. And the electric mobility pilot is already operational. So electric buses and minivans are in service, generating significant passenger use and valuable operational data, with women and men benefiting almost equally. So looking across the 4 components of the project, so institutionalization is progressing, although some planning and coordination outputs still need to move through the political process. So the EV pilot are also advancing, so particularly the electric bus fleet, while charging infrastructure remains one of the main bottlenecks due to permitting and grid capacity challenge. But scale up is showing particularly strong progress with major advance in the national charging network and policy and standard work. Although some measures are still waiting for a formal cabinet adoption. So finally, the long-term sustainability measures are progressing, including EV disposal and power sector standards. So overall, Antigua is clearly moving from planning into real-world demonstration. So the project is generating viable operational evidence, and the key challenges now is to consolidate the policy, regulatory, and infrastructure framework needed to move from pilots to wider scale deployment. So moving to San Lucia, the other speakers already talked about San Lucia project. So the situation is somewhat different now. So the project is called Supporting the Shift to Electric Mobility in San Lucia. So has a GEF budget of around $785,000 with approximately $4.2 million in co-financing. So the project focuses on institutional coordination, EV demonstrations, financial initiatives, and business model and long-term vehicles and battery end-of-life management. So one of the main achievements so far is the establishment of Technical Working Group 1, so which is expected to become a subcommittee of the Road Transport Board. There is particularly important because responsibilities for electric mobility are currently spread across different government institutions. So stakeholder engagement and training, and also progressing with support with the GIZ and the University of West Indies. So on the demonstration side, the project is working closely with the GIZ NDC-TEC project. So this joint approach will create a significantly larger demonstration than the GEF project would have achieved on its own. So there are also encouraging developments in market with financial institutions now offering 100% financing for electric vehicles, as the other speaker said. So, and local dealers expanding their EV offer. So I will summarize maybe San Lucia as a strong institutional preparation, growing market support, and good progress through project coordination. But the critical next step is to move from preparation to actual fleet deployment and strengthen the policy and end-of-life management. And finally, let me turn to Renera. So the project is called Accelerating the Introduction of Low Emissions and Climate Resilient Electric Mobility in Renera, with a GEF budget of approximately $1 million. So the project focuses on institutional coordination, EV and charging demonstrations, fiscal and regulatory measures, and vehicles and battery end-of-life management. Renera is currently the project facing the risk implementation challenges. So several factors have contributed to this. The project initially faced difficulties recruiting key staff or delays in fund disbursement. Then Hurricane Beryl in July 2024 further disrupted implementation. So as a result, most core activities remain at a very early stage. Institutional outputs, including e-mobility, coordination, unit, transport strategy, and transport data system, had made essentially no progress, while the EV demonstration and charging infrastructure were still only at the design stage. But there are, however, two important positive developments. So first, Renera has established a strong fiscal framework for EV uptake. So having removed custom duties, motor vehicles, and tax, and value added tax on battery electric vehicles. So while this was not directly delivered by the project, it provides an important enabling environment for future EV deployment. So the second is that the project is making progress on end-of-life management. So working with GIZ NDC-TEC project and the Grenada Solid Waste Management Authority to update the waste management framework for EVs and batteries. So I will summarize Grenada project as a strong policy foundations and some promising work on sustainability, but significant institutional and implementation constraints have delayed the project from moving into actual EV demonstration. The key lesson is the importance of establish clear governance and dedicate e-mobility coordination mechanisms from the outset. So before I close, I wanted to leave you with a forward-looking picture. So the work doesn't stop with GEF7. 3 new and complementary initiatives are already underway or launching. So looking ahead, I think the important point is that these 3 projects that I talked about before should not be seen as isolated national projects. So they are part of a broader regional ecosystem, and there are several opportunities to build on the foundations created to GEF7. So the first thing I want to say is through the GEF8 Global Electric Mobility Program. So Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, and Grenada will continue to have access to global tools, thematic working groups, and knowledge exchange. So GEF8 also brings some new areas of focus that are particularly relevant for the Caribbean, included last mile connectivity and transport digitalization, innovative financing, and the connection between energy and transport and battery and life management. So second, there is the second project I want to talk about is the Access Plus. There is a project funded through United Nations Development Account. There is a UNEP lead initiative with UN Habitat and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and focusing on digitalization of urban mobility in small island developing states and landlocked developing countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to address gender inequities and leave no one behind. So Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Grenada are among the pilot projects or pilot countries. So this creates an opportunity to connect electric mobility with broader agenda around digitalization, gender inclusion, and transport planning. So finally, and finally, the last project I want to talk about is one particular interesting regional opportunity is the Caribbean Electric Vehicle Battery and Life Hub. So this is based on a hub and spoke approach for the organization of Eastern Caribbean states island. So the rationale is quite straightforward. So individual islands often do not have sufficient battery volumes, infrastructure, or economies of scale to develop their own end-of-life facilities. So instead, a regional hub could handle processing and export, while the individual islands operate as a spoke. So this could provide a more practical and economically viable solution. So just to conclude, I will highlight 3 key messages. So first, the Caribbean is already moving beyond the discussion stage. So Antigua and Barbuda is generating real operational experience with electric buses and other vehicles, while St. Lucia and Grenada are building the institutional and market condition for deployment. And second key message is the experience of these projects shows that electric mobility is not only about purchasing vehicles, It requires coordinating policy, financing, charging infrastructure, technical skills, data, institutional capacity, and increasingly solutions for electric for vehicles and battery end of life. So the third message is that regional cooperation is essential for small island states. Some challenges simply cannot be solved efficiently at the level of one island alone. So it is particularly true for technical capacity, financial knowledge exchange, and battery and life management. So yes, the opportunity for UNEP going forward is really to connect the national pilots with regional mechanisms so that the lessons generated in Antigua, San Lucia, and Grenada can benefit the wider Caribbean. So I think that is all from my side. So thank you very much, and I leave here my email in case you like to contact us here in UNEP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. I want to say thanks again to all our presenters, Aisha, Niebert, Antonio, Diana, for, I think, very insightful and clear presentations. As I speak, I'm anticipating that you will prepare now to engage us with some questions, and our presenters can then respond to you with their answers. Remember that you should just raise your virtual hand so we can see that you have a question, or maybe you may have a comment that you want to insert. We haven't seen any questions in the chat as yet, at least not on my side. So as you think,
there are questions, David.
okay, great. So
Yeah.
as we prepare to engage in that, let me just put a string through all of them. Targets are important in order to get the process started of increasing our EV penetration. We have to monitor that, knowing what the status is. But then public sector, private sector, individuals are all rational. And so incentives and those mechanisms which encourage the uptake of electric mobility is very important. And then the development partners and their role is also very important in how the region develops. And from what we have heard, the partners are very important, not just in providing pilots, but also in sort of pushing the boundary, testing what can be done, identifying the areas to be strengthened, such as infrastructure or institutional development policy and cooperation. So having said that, I'm going to ask the presenters to put your videos back on so we can see you and remember your part. And then I'm going to ask Tekla to just raise the questions which have been submitted. Thanks. Sorry, Tekla, let me just pause and just ensure that no one has an open question that they'd like to ask. And I'm not seeing anything on my side. I'm not sure if you can see on yours.
Hello?
Yes, I see Mr. Husbands. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I have a question, something that has been concerning me, and it was mentioned, I think, by the penultimate speaker. It has to do with the charging infrastructure, trying to make sure that's in place. I'm calling from Barbados, obviously, and I've known about our transport sector. And I've also noticed that while we have the electric buses on the road, it seems as though the grid was not able to support the charging. So that at all of the major bus terminals, there are large diesel generators that have been installed that basically run 24/7 in order to, seemingly, that's just an observation. But my concern is more from a domestic point of view in terms of what is happening to support the rollout of EVs to the public. Because what I've noticed I just use my neighborhood as an example, the power company obviously did not outfit the neighborhood. They didn't envisage multiple houses, running 2, 3, 4 kilowatts of charging for long periods of time. And the neighborhood distributions don't seem to be sufficient. I mean, my example is one 30 kVA transformer that serves, 20 houses. And that's typical for Barbados. And as EVs roll out, it seems to me that that would be a major problem for people who want to charge at home.
Right.
And I'm just wondering,
Okay.
is there a program to upgrade the grid in neighborhoods? And has that been addressed, or how is it being addressed?
Thank you very much, Mr. Husbands. Antonio?
Yes, that's a very good question, Mr. Husbands. So I have the benefit of having a little bit of utility experience myself, having worked in Barbados in the past. But what I would say to you is that it's an ongoing and recurring process. The utility has to collect information over and over again. So it's like various projects you will see in the region would be like advanced metering infrastructure or smart meters, where the utility will install these types of devices. So it's a continuous project. What I would say from my observation is that most of the utilities are in the data collection phase, trying to wrap their heads around the magnitude of the issue before they implement any technical solutions. But there are various initiatives that you might have to implore, but I don't want to prescribe anything now because you need to understand the nature of the specific issues. But it's an ongoing thing. Persons assessing it. The challenge for fleets, though, is a different challenge because you're looking at a cluster of charging in a centralized location, and that presents a different challenge at a higher level. So that is more of a planning challenge because you're looking at a very big load in the magnitude of megawatts for some of these bus depots and stuff. So that is something that requires system planning, requires maybe some reconfiguration of the transmission and distribution network to facilitate it. And it also has to take into consideration the growth of the EV charging over the years. So this is one of those things that you could fix one issue in one area and another one might arise with another problem. So it's going to take continuous work from the utility and an iterative process to fix. So yeah, that's the best answer I could give right now.
Thanks, Antonio. I don't know if Diana wants to chime in a little bit. I know Antigua and Barbuda also had some infrastructural challenges that they have to overcome. Would you want to chime in, Diana? You don't have to, but if you wish to. You're still muted if you're trying. All right, maybe we can take another question. If anyone else has a question they'd like to ask directly.
So I was also going to use the opportunity to say that I see quite similar questions in the chat.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if Antonio has answered all of them. So for instance, there's a question by Richard Gordon about whether charging port operating is left to electric utilities or respective governments. I'm not sure if that was addressed in the question, in the response that Antonio was given earlier on. There's a question here from Howard Kalash asking whether an off-grid DC fast charging depot for the battery electric vehicles. I'm not sure if this is a question about Jamaica or if that's because that doesn't say which location. There was another question that's related to that. Yeah, that sounds like a question for Jamaica. And yeah, so there were two of these similar questions. I'm not sure if that was already responded to.
Okay. Antonio, any of that seems to be a variant, and if you want to respond. So off-site charging capabilities, and the other one, Tekla?
Yeah, off-site charging capabilities, and the other one was about whether charging port operation was left up to electric utilities or respective governments. Like who's responsible for this?
Who's responsible?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I guess I could start and then Niebert, you could join in, but we've seen mixed arrangements across the region. So for example, in Belize, as an example, the public charging network is owned by the utility, So BEL has deployed the public charging network. Similarly, in St. Lucia, Lucilette has taken the initiative to deploy the public charging network. But in Barbados, you see that as a different arrangement where a private company, Megapower, is managing the public charging network. So it's not consistent across the region. There are different arrangements right now. And I would also argue that the regulatory environment is still gray on that, because we're seeing the reselling of electricity, which is not explicitly legislated or regulated in some markets, but it is of course happening. So it's still gray right now. It's not a one size fits all arrangement across the region at this time.
All right, thanks so much. I'm seeing a hand, Shahad Hussein. Do you want to go
Just
ahead?
now, David, just before you go on,
Oh,
I was
sorry.
trying to indicate.
Yeah, let that go first.
Super, thank you, Mr. Hussein. So with the question from Mr. Husbands and then the follow-up by Tekla in terms of the charging infrastructure and how it is handled. Of course, we're doing some work under that, as you're aware, under our policy framework under the NDC-TEC. And again, Antonio alluded to the fact that we have not yet equipped our regulating bodies to handle this kind of innovation that we're seeing, disruptive innovation within the Caribbean sector. I'll look at the charging and then I'll go to that. So when it comes to the charging, because there are some questions that were asked in the chat again about the cost for charging, we have also developed a standard that can be utilized for identifying what would be an affordable tariff, and that will allow for some kind of profit revenue being achieved by that. Now, when it comes to the vehicles now being purchased and being charged in the home and how it affects the national grid, again, it begs for a different mode of operation within our systems. We know when we purchase a vehicle, we go to the tax office and we pay our taxes, we have our road license and it goes on the road. Now, what this new system of e-mobility is alluding to is where we will have to now go to a power company or some registration group that looks at electrification within your community to be able to register your vehicle being an electric vehicle, so that the utility would be able to capture that information. Whether or not it's the utility being publicly owned or privately owned, it has to be something that has to be implemented by government. A utility, especially that is privately owned, cannot intervene in such an instance. So this is where we see there's opportunity for more policy work within the work we're doing here in the region, as well on the NDC-TEC in our policy sector. So that is why we will encounter these problems. And as we encounter these problems and we learn from them, we will be forced to have these systems implemented. I don't know of any Caribbean country where this is happening. Based on the work we've been doing in Grenada, the request has been made that we try to monitor what we're seeing pop up, which are these little Uber networks that you see popping up, and how do they incorporate e-mobility or electric vehicles into their fleet, because they are also competing with the taxis and the bus, the public bus network, which is privately owned. So these are some different areas that we have been looking into. And to address these areas, in the case of Grenada, St. Lucia, Barbados, we have seen where you have what you consider the transport board, and I put that in hyphenated marks, because what is the transport board really mandated to do? Okay, if it's looking at electric vehicles, it has to have an arm that looks into what is happening with electric vehicles in the different parts of their country, so that they can understand what those needs are. So to better come back to the point of Mr. Husbands, and then for the charging tariff, is that more work needs to be done in how we structure our model of importation of electric vehicles and how these vehicles are charged. It's not just bringing the vehicles into the countries to address the basis on which these vehicles now can be connected into your home. For now, it's being done in a ad hoc manner, but this ad hoc manner cannot continue for too long. So yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Hussein, just before you come in, just to let our participants know that the partners on the table here, CMS, GIZ, UNEP, would have various documents, reports, and so on, which have been generated. So I'm going to ask the participants, the presenters, and anyone from the three institutions to put your email in the chat. And so if before we leave or after you have specific documents you may be very interested to look at in depth, then you can contact the various persons. Mr. Hussein.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So it's a bright sunny day in Guyana, and thank you very much for all the presenters. Just to add, actually, well, in fact, there was a question, but then Mr. Antonio answered part of it. So, and the question was actually, how does we manage those charging infrastructures as individuals? So currently, I'm speaking on a lightly note with Guyana because we actually increases our generation capacity soon to come 300 megawatts. So we have an amount of energy. Now, what the team is actually looking at is that every new resident that has actually been setting up houses, team or developing areas, is that they would increase the transformer size to cater for these amount of external growth. And we know everybody wants air conditioning, everybody wants electric vehicle, some sort of additional equipment. So I think these factors are being implemented. As Doc mentioned, it's a kind of slow process, but there is that coming with data. And I do I do open to work with other countries as in help these kinds of data process so that they could get to see what is it like. Example for CCREEE. CCREEE actually show the whole data we call it the data collection chart every year. And that is good to implement in their data chart so every country could see the progress from them and the progress to now.
Okay.
How we moving. Additionally, my question is that, and though we keep moving on to these things, I think there is also some additional space to improve or to move along with not just training alone, but a hub so that everybody could pool in their knowledge too. I know they are. I think we just need to push in some more on it because it's a new activity here in the Caribbean. Example for the electric boat. Grenada, I think, was the only one that have it. Guyana, we have a lot of shuttles. We have I think 8 or 9 electric forklifts. Last year, Island Gas Expo, I was there with the skid loaders, fully electric skid loaders, 18. And the guy told me he bringing in 2 electric excavators. So the scope is big. And,
Right.
and like I said, manpower is needed, training is needed. Even a fellowship I should propose is needed also, so that everybody could stay under one hub. So thanks for the time.
Thanks very much. Very good interventions. While Tekla lines up the next set of questions in the chat, I would just say that GIZ, of course, is quite happy to push the envelope on electric mobility in the marine space. There is a party boat or entertainment boat that's already in Grenada, is it, Antonio?
Yeah.
Yes, and we are also, sort of pushing the envelope with our project there. And then Diana, through the UNEP Jeff 7 project, is pushing the envelope on heavy duty vehicles with the trucks and buses. So and of course, 2 and 3 wheelers. A lot of times you will see projects around cars and SUVs and vans, but I'm just saying that the partners are pushing the ends of the technology. Tekla?
Yeah, so what I was going to say, of the 69 participants we still have here, we see that some of them are dropping out now. But the questions, some of like Niebert Blair, some of our presenters have gone on to answer those questions. So if you are looking in the chat, you could see some questions answered already. But for the benefit of those who are not looking in the chat, I found there was a really interesting question here that maybe I can read out, even if I see that Dr. Blair has answered. So there's a question related to how the amount of travel that taxis do. Yeah. So in some cases, according to Kirkland Rowe here, there's a question here about how in some cases taxi operators make up the bulk of the transportation sector and may even exceed the mileage of some government-operated public transport sector. Has there been any EV program specifically designed to encourage taxi operators to transition to EVs? So I could say not under the NDC-TEC. We haven't done that, but I'm not sure if the CMS could answer that question. In particular, are there examples where taxi operators were the primary beneficiaries of incentives, such as preferential vehicle financing, reduced charging rates, dedicated charging facilities, etc., or whether they've been part of a broader e-mobility pilot? So we could say that under our project here called the NDC-TEC, taxi drivers were not beneficiaries, but I'm not sure if any of my other colleagues has that answer, and if the CMS may know something they may have done in Latin America where this question can be answered so that everybody could benefit.
Thanks, Eklo. Niebert, do you want to respond there, or anyone else?
Yeah.
I would have responded in the chat, yes, and I can continue here where I share that. No, I've not learned about any such mechanism in place or program in place for taxis to become fully electrified. And when we look at the NDC-TEC project, and I'll stress more a little on that. Why? Because NDC-TEC, we work mainly with government. So in terms of working with the taxis, that will mean that it's a private enterprise. We're currently having a bit of a challenge even working with the buses in our region, because we know the buses are privately owned, but the fact is they transport the public, and so do taxis. They would, and if we are to categorize them based on the way we look at government and private vehicles, we would generally classify all our transport system in the Caribbean as private, and government fleet as just government owned and run vehicles. So in a case like that, the answer is no. The short answer is no. I don't know of such a program. It's going to be a very interesting and innovative way of us addressing such a program. And for that, we need a structured system and mechanism. We know of in Grenada, we've been working, and St. Lucia, Barbados, we know you have a bus association, and persons there are very vigilant and vibrant in getting information. So something like this would be good for a bus association to have some kind of public-private engagement going forward, given the benefits of electric vehicles, and to learn more about how do we adapt electric vehicles into the fleet. All right, so thanks for that question.
Thanks very much. We only have 2 minutes left in our schedule, and I see Leslie Smith. So Leslie, you have the privilege of closing us out on questions, unless there are any burning ones. Please proceed.
Hi, thank you, David, and good morning, colleagues. So good to see so many of you, and to thank you very much for this very enriching webinar. I think the information was very useful and very pertinent. So it's not questions that I have, but a couple comments based on what I've heard so far. And the first one that I want to speak about is with the charging infrastructure that was spoken about, and Antonio gave a pretty much good account of what is happening in the various territories, and that no one size fits all. But in the case of Grenada, the electric mobility charging infrastructure is basically privately driven, private investors. And the issue for us is that the rate is not regulated. So there are two rates that have been offered now, one for level 2 charging and one for DC fast charging. And in both instances, the rates are higher than the per kilowatt hour charge by the utility. And the obvious reason here is that they have to make something, they pay the utility the regular rate. So that is private sector driven. And going back to Dr. Niebert's presentation with regards to the duties for the EVs and the hybrids. So we have differential duties here. The EVs get a different rate than the hybrids. But the issue for us now is that the intended objective is not what we are seeing, in the sense that we expected to see a lot more electric vehicles than hybrids. But what we see now is that 60% of the imports are hybrids and only 4% are electric vehicles. So the discussion now is to adjust the incentive that is being offered for the hybrids And there are a number of proposals that are being contemplated now. And that we expect to see a difference in the numbers. But there's one thing about Dr. Niebert's presentation that I was not quite in agreement with. So although it was said that incentives are being offered and the incentives are very good, but the offtake for EVs have been slow. So we have almost every year a 300% increase. I know there's a difference between percentage and absolute numbers, but we've been seeing for 2 consecutive years now an almost 300% increase in EVs on our roads. And some may argue that that may not be a slow uptake, it is only 4% of total vehicle imports. And so I just wanted to highlight those particular issues. But we have been doing a tremendously good job here in convincing people that EVs are the better options. And more people are getting convinced now that EVs are the way to go. With regards to the NDC-TEC project that Antonio presented on the pilot for the electric boats, this again has garnered a lot of interest here, and we look forward to see the outcome of that particular project. So these are just my comments, but again, I want to thank you. I thought it was a very, very engaging and enriching presentation from everybody, and I think we can only go further from here.
Thank you so much. Niebert, I think you would be in agreement with some of the things Leslie said. So we can proceed to close, I believe.
We take one more comment here from Owen Gunning, who is up just before we close, even if we are 2 minutes over. Are you still available, Mr. Gunning?
I'm not seeing his hand, so is it a text request? A chat?
His
Yes.
hand is up. Yeah.
So Owen, you can go.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Owen. Go ahead. We are a little bit under time.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. One of the disincentive to people to buying EV is the different type of chargers that you have, and so you have CCS1, CCS2, CHAdeMO. Tesla has a different charger, and so when you go to a charging station, even though they are few in numbers, not sufficient at all, you still have the problem of not finding the type of charging port that you would like for your vehicle. And then you also have the question of the size chargers, because nobody is going to sit for 8 hours to charge with a Type 2 charger. So the information to put in this charging infrastructure, whether it's the utility or whether it is private. In Jamaica, we have two private ones. We have JPS and Evergo, but you still have the challenge of charging. If you drive out of maybe the city, and even the city, you have very few fast chargers. Can the Caribbean government, as a policy, get this information out to the manufacturers that they either need to put in a charger which is standardized, so that we can operate them within the Caribbean? Can our government do that for us? Thanks.
Thanks very much, Owen. I would just say that for NDC-TEC, we're working with Jamaica and the Bureau of Standards to do EV standards development. So we believe that will contribute positively to the way forward. We are also aware that Guyana has done work with EV standards. And so that's also very important. And we trust that as we collaborate with all the partners and all the countries, that the value that you have raised of having some level of standardization will filter through to all. So thanks for that intervention. We have come to the end of a very, very interesting webinar. I think a lot of insights from all the parties around targets and status, around incentives or disincentives, around the role of the partners and pushing the envelope, and the learnings that we have had. I do want to say thanks very much to all the planners and the partners here from CMS. There are some persons in the background that you may not see. Thanks to Paula, thanks to Marianne, thanks to Yanina, thanks to Ignacio. Want to say thanks to GIZ, that's Niebert and Antonio, and of course I'm with GIZ. Want to say thanks to UNEP, Diana represented, and want to say thanks to CCREEE and Aisha participated. Thanks again to all of your stakeholders. We trust that the webinar is not just information for you, but will be part of your tools and arsenal for supporting the transition to sustainable transportation. And having said that, tune in. We will have a second run. We are planning to, in this case, target the suppliers, manufacturers towards the end of the year. And that is also going to be a very interesting webinar. So without further ado, thanks for being here. Thanks for participating, and have a great one.
All right, thank you.